Um, all right, Alex, just shared it with you. Omar, it's in our channel. Just shared it with the rest of the group in the SVM community chat, and then Chase, I'm going to send it to you right now on our DM on Twitter. Cool. Great. Let me just pull up my intro here, and we'll get going. Hey, everybody, and welcome to Everything SVM. We've been hosting this daily for the last couple of days. I'm Alex Kehaya. I'm the host of a podcast called the Index Podcast and the founder of ABK Labs, where we are focused on building open source tools for SVM builders. My co-host today is Omar, founder of Mantis. Omar, you want to give a quick hello?
Hey guys, I'm Omar, founder of Mantis. Really focused on introducing chain abstraction Solana L2 to the Solana ecosystem for unifying and abstracting user experience in the crypto space.
And just a little bit about why we're doing this. This is a series of live streams this week focused on what's happening in the SVM space. We're seeing a number of teams work on L2s, rollups, permission environments, and other tech that extends and improves the functionality you get from Solana mainnet. And we just want to use this space as a place for public discourse and sharing of ideas and exploring new ideas. Our mission is and goal is simple. It's to build useful open source software that accelerates Solana. One of the coolest things about starting the SVM community chat on Telegram, which is open to anybody to join, is that every team that's working on this wants useful open source software and a set of standards that accelerates the building of SVM chains and products. So that's been a really cool thing to see the community start to coalesce and coordinate around open source software. Today, we've got Alex Golding of Delphi Digital. They're a venture capital firm that invests heavily in our space. And Chase, who's one of the co-founders of Molecule, which is an SVM network on top of Bitcoin. Alex, let's start with you. Can you please just share a bit about your background, how you got to investing in this space, and why you're here today?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Alex. So I've actually known Alex for several years now because I worked at Solana Labs during Solana Summer when he was there, and it was still like there weren't that many people at the firm then, so it's great to kind of be here full circle several years later. Brief bit about Delphi in 1 minute, and brief bit about myself. Delphi Ventures is a investment firm, venture capital investment firm. We primarily do pre-seed and seed, sometimes Series A, sometimes a little bit later. It's all prop capital based upon our experiences. So Delphi's founders created a research firm, a venture studio, a consulting arm, and investment. We've launched 2 formally unicorn protocols. We've launched an inscriptions protocol. We've done token econ work and advisory work and strategy work for some very big names like Aave, Compound Balancer, Axie, Synthetics. Done some governance work for some major L2s. In the Cosmos ecosystem, launched our own app chains. So we really understand kind of what it takes to build. We understand what it takes to build in different ecosystems. Like I mentioned, I was at Solana. We've done work in Cosmos. We've done work in EVM world and ETH world. So just kind of try to bring that wealth of experience to bear to help founders.
Very cool. Thanks for that. I did not know that about Delphi, like the breadth. I always just thought you guys were venture only, but I stand educated. Thank you. Chase, I would love to hear more about yourself, how you got into building Molecule, and what Molecule actually is next. You're on mute still, Chase. Seems like maybe we're having some technical issues here. Chase, can you hear me? Oh. Oh, he dropped. All right. Well, I think, yeah, we lost him. Let's let him rejoin. I'll try and help get him back on. I think the place I want to start here, and this is for both you, Omar and Alex. I'd love to hear your thoughts here. Maybe Alex go first, but what's your thesis on why people are building SVM chains? Oh, we're back.
Hey guys, so sorry.
No problem.
Technical difficulties.
Yeah, All good. Let's jump right back in. Tell us about your background and why you're starting Molecule and like what Molecule actually is.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess my background is slightly different. I started from TradFi. I was at Blackstone in private equity, and that was when I got exposed to Bitcoin because that was the only asset class I could invest in. And after that, I dived full on to crypto in early 2021 when I joined Binance Labs, was leading crypto investments there. Was pretty fortunate to look into a lot of the cross-chain interoperability solutions back then. Also led the investment for Layer Zero, which recently went public, um, and got inspired by the team also to dive into entrepreneurship. So started my own company about 3 years ago now, and have always been in Solana ecosystem, built multiple products for Solana ecosystem as a whole, and most recently started Molecule. And the reason we started Molecule is very simple. We wanted to build the most user-friendly consumer chain, and Solana I guess Solana's tech stack makes the most sense for it. How we think about it is really combining the most best-in-class technical components of a blockchain. So on the settlement layer, we're using SVM, which is the most battle-tested execution environment, and then we'll settle onto Bitcoin, which we think is the most decentralized and secure settlement layer. Yeah, I guess that's like a quick intro of myself.
Thanks for that. Really interesting background as an investor, it sounds like, at Binance Labs. And I think it's cool that you helped lead their investment into Layer Zero. I know that team well, and it's a very cool project. And I think a poignant topic is, for this show has always been interoperability. It's been a big issue amongst the SVM builders to try to figure out that I still think we're all looking into. But what I was getting into when we heard those technical issues was, what's your thesis on why people want to build their own SVM chains? Like in Chase, I'd love to hear from you as well, like what your reasons are for doing an SVM chain versus like doing this on mainnet. And then we can kind of go around the room here and answer that question. But I think that's something that people who are not in the space are like trying to figure out.
Do we think maybe we could take 30 seconds and just break down for the audience, like what is the SVM? Just to kind of do a little level setting.
Go for it. Go for it.
Happy to. Yeah, guys. So the Solana Virtual Machine to me takes the execution environment out, and the transaction, which is comprised of a few different units, right? The transaction processing unit, a couple others, and kind of isolates that into its own thing. So that way, people can just take advantage of the benefits of Solana's like highly parallelized tech, and they can get these like very high throughput kind of use cases done in this execution environment. And so when I look at a thing like what Molecule is building, right, instead of having 7 transactions per second, and so which is Bitcoin's thing, you can get thousands of transactions per second, and depending on your validator set and stuff, you can lower confirmation times to absurdly fast, right? Theoretically, like faster than, or also in practice faster than like what Solana mainnet does, and some other things. So this is why like we've got the modular stack, is you can pick and choose the best tech to kind of weave your own what some people kind of adoringly call like Frankenstein of a tech stack, to just have it be highly optimized. And a brief background in terms of history, right? Like Celestia kind of made this popular, build, the whole modular stack, and you've seen on Twitter and at conferences people talking about modular versus monolithic or modular versus integrated. And so I just want to make sure that everyone understands that that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the execution environment here. There are other layers. There's a data availability layer, which is where data is stored for it to be later recalled for use. When you're making state changes, there's a settlement layer, which is really, in my opinion, the transaction broadcasting layer. That please, Omar or Chase or Alex, correct me if I'm wrong. And then there's also the consensus layer, right? Like how do we make sure this is like censorship resistant? And yeah, so I just want to make sure that everyone kind of understands that we're primarily talking about the execution layer here today.
Yeah, I think it's great that you break that out, because there are, well, I actually think that there are, when you talk about why people are building SVM chains, they are I feel like what I'm seeing is there are some patterns around the things that people are customizing and that they want more control of with, or they like want to optimize. You talked about optimization, and they are at there are some people doing different things at like all levels of that stack that you just talked about, and it kind of gets rolled up into SVM as like a name, but it's not exactly accurate, right? As far as like where everything sits. But yeah, maybe let's start with Chase. Like, why are you guys using an SVM chain versus like your own SVM chain versus building something on mainnet? I think that's like a big question that people have.
Yeah, I think Alex has made some good points also segue into this question about the performant nature of the SVM. And I think that is definitely one of the most important part of I guess how we can make the decision whether we go EVM or we go SVM. So I think just like the parallel nature of the execution environment allows much higher throughput than our counterparts in the Ethereum ecosystem. And I think one thing is also Solana alignment. I think we as a team, we've always been building on Solana. We've worked with more than 10 hacker houses over the past year or so. And we have a good understanding of the ecosystem, have a strong relationship with builders in the ecosystem, and we want to bring that to other ecosystems. So we have seen EVM, for example, proliferate that with the EVM chains, essentially doing marketing for Ethereum as a whole. We think we can do the same for Solana ecosystem, and that will not only broaden, I guess, grow the pie, for the whole ecosystem, but also potentially, make a bigger effort into letting other ecosystems know what Solana is about. So that's really where we're coming from, besides the technical aspect of it. And I think the last point is really specific to Bitcoin as ecosystem. So Bitcoin script has traditionally not been Turing complete, but you can do some interesting stuff with it. So I think people are, as a whole ecosystem, are figuring out how to, do interesting calculations such as, or even like verify ZK proofs using Bitcoin script. And the only way to add programmability to Bitcoin is adding a separate execution environment. A lot of the teams are using EVM because of the sort of more common use practice there. But we think that, why don't we use a new attack that's also battle tested, that is the SVM.
Omar, what about you? What about for Mantis? Like, what was the decision making there to build an SVM chain that's separate from mainnet?
Yeah. I mean, I think like, we see ourselves eventually sort of evolving into an architecture that's kind of like so there's a project out there called Suave, which is focused on block building for Ethereum mainnets, like in a sort of decentralized mechanism, sort of taking MEV boost, the relay, and putting it on chain, and having builders like build blocks for different ecosystems in a single location. We think that inherently with Suave being EVM only on Suave at the moment, it's definitely a bit limiting for like how you create logic for auctions, for other applications like intent fulfillment, and just like offering people sort of like a simple and fast experience to be able to broadcast like user intent and also get this like native block building stuff. And so Mantis, but nonetheless, Suave is a chain, right? And the reason for that is because there's a necessity to keep everything in sort of the same location, everything from like, here are the orders we want to execute, and then the instructions for how to execute them, and then exposing these things to outside parties. The only way we can actually decentralize things like solver networks and auctions for MEV and stuff like this does require on-chain capabilities. And the nice thing about the SVM is a lot of the sort of mempool logic and other logic associated with execution is contained directly in the lead validator. for this respective epoch. And so we're able to do a lot of interesting things where, for instance, this validator can be permissioned in such a way where they're only able to expose, their transactions to searchers who have already pre-said, hey, like there's something interesting coming up, I'd like to take a look at it, or condition themselves that way. So I think there's like this inherent ability to input privacy into like how the SVM is producing blocks. And I think there's really no other VM out there that can combine, that's already as equally as performant, but is also on a path to eventual privacy as quickly as the SVM ecosystem.
So
Wait.
Go ahead. I just wanted to clarify something. It sounds like you guys had needed to make some changes to the validator client itself to enable your use case, and so that was like one big reason why you needed to fork and have your own network.
Yeah, so I think it's like a few things. First is we want to be able to control, so first of all, like we wanted to implement a different fee mechanism for Solana, right? It's like versus Solana. So Solana L1 has a specific fee mechanism. We think like our L2 should have a different fee mechanism that is much more reminiscent of how fees are being handled on Ethereum. Why? Because we're doing intent settlement on like, all these different chains that are IBC connected. And these things require like some level of prioritization. And I think the logic for tipping and sort of people expressing themselves on EVM and Ethereum land is a bit more expressive than like the Solana fee models. That was like one major area of change. The second is like, yeah, we have these validator clients that we can allow searchers and other actors to tap directly into for order flow exposure. You can't in Ethereum land, it's a little bit different because like you have builders that do this. And so there's also this breakage of trust assumptions a little bit within the Ethereum ecosystem in that like builders are not staked in any way. They're just producing the best blocks and it is what it is essentially. And then the relay picks like the blocks and sends them to the proposers. We think we can architect something a little bit differently for this, where it is very heavily validator based, and obviously Jito is like on the front lines of doing this stuff, but we think it's equally valuable for cross-chain transactions as well.
Wait, so just so I understand, so you guys have also, for the listeners, you guys have created kind of like a native yield L2 that on Solana runs the SVM. It sounds like you forked some of the code and changed some of the code, and you're also creating your own MEV infra. Yeah, so you will not be running, like your validators will not be running like Jito's client. They'll be running your own.
Yeah, so exactly. We're making quite a lot of changes to the validator to support all this stuff. So we are like in the early days hoping to try to be as close as like, I don't know the size of the team that would be necessary to try to maintain like parallelism between the existing Solana client and our client. But I think in the early days, we're trying our best to be like very similar. But like, yeah, I think inevitably like one major issue that a lot of SVM protocols will have is in order for you to do custom things on your SVM protocol, you need to change the validator client. And what we see a lot of people doing is like they're changing very specific pieces like here and there that don't really get changed so much. Like in the Agave client or in this new stuff that Anza's working on as well. But like inevitably it's just going to be a huge mishmash. And I think that's like one concern is like in Ethereum land, you sort of have, everyone's just looks at OP Geth when they're doing like an optimistic rollup and then they make changes. But there are services out there that sort of help you like know how to get up to date so your sequencer doesn't break if you need to upgrade to the latest version of Geth, as an example. Because everything is very localized in this case to the validator, it's even more important to maintain parallelism because otherwise just everything just breaks if Solana, for instance, needs to push a new patch. And so I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges that all these teams face. And I think it's like Alex has been talking about this tool that they're going to roll out for solving this. I think that's like super valuable in and of itself.
Yeah, there are some things that we're working on at ABK Labs, Alex Golding, that hopefully will help mitigate some of this. I don't think that there's like a fully automated, version or like way to solve this problem. It's like a software development process. But there are some, I think just like some standards and some adjustments we can probably make to the Agave client that'll, I just went on mute here, but yeah. So, like, kind of keeping the conversation going here, Chase, can you talk a little bit more about Molecule and how it actually works, and like what kinds of things are going to get you hoping to have built on top of Molecule? You having issues with the mute button again? Yep. I'm sure he's going to
No.
rejoin. Seems like we're having
We
some
lost him.
software issues.
Yeah, but I would love to hear. I'm kind of curious, especially for Molecule when he comes back. I would love to hear how he hopes to get people to build and who he thinks his like kind of target market is and stuff. Like, why did he choose? Yeah, like what? Would love to hear some of these things.
Alex, I couldn't hear you.
No,
For
I was
some
going to
reason
say,
your
I was
voice
telling
came through.
Alex Golding, he had some questions for you that I thought maybe he could just jump in and ask now that you're back. But stay unmuted so we don't lose you again.
Yeah, for sure.
Alex Golding, you want to quickly just like ask Chase what you were saying? I think you were saying like wondering about target market and how basically what he was saying is like, what's your target market and how do you plan to attract builders to build things on your network?
Yeah, like all that. How do you track liquidity? How do you track builders? I'm very curious about the inspiration behind this that inspired you to do all this.
Yeah, I think it will come in two phases. The end goal will always be to grow the pie. So anyone who has some experience writing programs or low-level programs using Rust, we welcome those developers to the ecosystem and convert them to be SVM builders. But the first phase will be looking at existing Solana builders to build a molecule. And the reason for that is there is a huge amount of untapped liquidity that's lying idle on Bitcoin right now, and Bitcoin as an asset is half a crypto. So there's a lot of synergies that we can tap into. And so the first phase will be getting Solana builders to expand into the Bitcoin ecosystem, and the second phase is to encourage current Bitcoin developers. Many of them are coding in Rust as well, and also Web2 developers who have been building using Rust. So that's sort of the how we think about building out the developer ecosystem. And I think the reason we want to do this is because we have been working with Solana and Solana Foundation on many of the events activation with my previous product, which is called the Sleek Cards. It's an NFC card that when you meet other people, you have your PFP on it. You just give them a tap. Everything gets connected to a Telegram bot, and we have a Solana wallet that's created for you to receive airdrops as well. So we did that together with Foundation for the past year or so, and we've been at the forefront of onboarding developers together with Foundation. We think that we can do much more than that. And Bitcoin is the most neutral, most decentralized, and also the largest ecosystem that's untapped right now. So we do think there's an opportunity there to create something that's really special.
So I'm curious here. When a lot of people like talk to me about L2s and on Bitcoin, they say, oh, the reason we're building on Bitcoin is it's highly secure, and people on Bitcoin value the security of settling to Bitcoin. And so I'm kind of curious, do you think that's true? What kind of data do you have that you think that supports that? Yeah, I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I think the security part is definitely true in terms of validating proofs from a ZK rollup, for example, right? So imagining any full Bitcoin node can um, verify that this proof from your chain is correct. I think that is very powerful, but I think more so about I think Bitcoin. It's more so about the demand for both the asset and the chain. So what's happened in the past year or so, Ordinals, BRC20, Runes, they have proven demand for Bitcoin as L1. So for those assets, I don't think it's really about using Bitcoin, but using Bitcoin's chain and the valuable block space. And then there's the question about Bitcoin as asset, how do you use that? And I think there's a lot of value to that as well. Probably won't be as high a percent of Bitcoin that's going to be flow into applications as Ethereum. But I think that's just the start. There's a lot of education going on, a lot of people pushing in this direction. So I do think there will be a lot of demand for Bitcoin to be used in Bitcoin native apps. And I think it'll be really great to see Solana being at the forefront of it, allowing Bitcoin native apps to be built in the Solana programs. So that's sort of where I'm coming from.
Appreciate you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when I think of like DeFi or just on-chain activity on Bitcoin, like Solana, like building on a Solana VM definitely makes kind of more sense to me than the EVM in that, if there's a variety of trade-offs you have to make, right? In terms of how Bitcoin native are you going to be? Are you just going to be some type of like roll up where the only difference is the execution environment, right? And then that one piece is EVM, but data availability, everything else is still Bitcoin, and settlement is. But if you're doing that, then you're transacting at the speed of Bitcoin, right? 7 TPS, right? 10 to 15 minute block times. Is that really the future of finance? I don't think so. But it's highly secure. It's highly censorship resistant. And then we've got EVM chains, right? So you're getting tens, maybe a couple hundred TPS when they're at max. And again, like that just doesn't seem to be quote unquote like strong enough to really support a robust financial system in the future of finance. But it does have a better meaning like there's a wider developer experience, or there's a wider pool of devs who could build there because there's more Ethereum devs than there are Solana devs. But when I think about the SVM, what's cool about it is that over the last 5 years, the number of devs building in Solana is huge. The number of assets in Solana is huge. So like there's some like brand recognition, like the word the letter S in Solana and SVM is still Solana, and so people are kind of encouraged to build there, and they hope that there'll be like this expansion. And so out of all of them, like if I have to think like what would work the best, like you might as well choose the best tech that then settles to Bitcoin. And so that to me makes sense. I think I just wonder though, like how many big people on Bitcoin, because right these L2s are really to attract Bitcoin assets, right? You lock up your Bitcoin on L1, bring your Bitcoin asset to the L2, and then do stuff with it. How many of those people actually want to do things? Are the majority of them like long-term players, right? Because until we had ordinals and runes last year, or ordinals and BRC20s last year, and runes this year, Bitcoin people just generally didn't do anything with their assets. 4% of Bitcoin was wrapped and brought to Ethereum for DeFi purposes, which to me it was almost the same as building an EVM Bitcoin L2. Like that should be, that in my mind, that should be the nearest analogy, and that shows not a lot of product market fit. And so are the people who came in from the ordinals craze and the BRC20 craze, are those the Bitcoin natives who don't like to wrap their assets, or who don't like to bring their assets to another execution environment? or is that a net new class of user? And are those the users, Chase, that you think will be using Molecule the most and interacting with apps that devs build the most? Or do you think that it's, like, if you had to kind of create a pie, like, do you have any forecast as to what amount of people will be kind of these degens that were doing BRC20s, and what percent are like kind of quote unquote like we don't move our Bitcoin, the Bitcoin OGs? And how many of them go from we don't move our Bitcoin OGs up?
He's every time he's got some issue with Riverside. I'm not really sure, but like the software we use to record this, but every time he has to go off mute, he has to restart.
Darn.
He's back.
Yeah, sorry, I guess there's some technical difficulty here, but so I apologize. But I did hear the question about the user on Bitcoin. I think that's really interesting. I do think that we are still really early on, but the fact is that Bitcoin is the most distributed asset in the world, with millions of users. Retail guys, when they first come into crypto, they will own Bitcoin. And some of those Bitcoins might be sitting natively in the wallet, but more so, a lot of the Bitcoin are sitting in exchanges. So I think that's really interesting because exchange also has a strong distribution capabilities, and therefore, just tapping into, let's say, 1% of Bitcoin, that's already more than 10 billion of assets. And I think one thing that people don't talk about as much about using SVM on Bitcoin, or just using SVM as a whole, is also the ease of writing Solana programs as compared to writing Solidity contracts. Some might argue it's more difficult, but many of us think that it's clearer logic. And Solana has made a lot of improvements on the user experience side with Token 22 standard, and recently with token extensions, adding some permission features to the permissionless chain and this blinks as well. So I think there's a lot of user-focused experiments that can be native on like a chain like ours, which makes it very interesting for user adoption. And I think the first phase will be retail. There will be some opportunities to the business side as well, which I think is really exciting. And Bitcoin being the most owned, most distributed asset, together with being SEC compliant, I think that's a really interesting space to explore. And I will say that on the SVM side, it's just the beginning. So there's a lot of interesting things we can experiment as well. So yeah, super excited for the future.
I'm just curious, Alex, what is your guys' thesis about SVM expansion? And because on the one hand, like, personally, I've been around since 2012, and now I'm like incredibly exhausted every time I see the newest, latest, hottest EVM rollup that does nothing different than the last like 100. And so I do think there is, like, from one perspective, the sort of alt VM landscape is exciting from like the perspective that it's new, but like what's the actual way to think, or the way that you guys think about valuing these networks like into the future?
Yeah, so I think and this is me personally, so Delphi, the great thing about Delphi is we're made up of what we call the hive mind, right? So there's 4 divisions, each division's got multiple employees, and so I can't speak for the entirety of Delphi, or not even the entirety of Delphi Ventures. I can just say, the way I look at investing in these things. And so I think that long run, you need a sustainable competitive advantage, right? Like, I think that when you look at the kind of the first few like EVM L2s, they had a competitive advantage in that there's a lot of ETH capital, ETH maxis, and also people who didn't want to bridge like out of this EVM ecosystem, who just were begging and dying for a place to like do activity on ETH. And with the rise of perps and the rise of GMX style derivatives, like they had their killer app. They were able to go and like generate lots of value for themselves and other people there. But as we get like out of those kind of first few, the ability to have I think that anyone who puts up like a vanilla rollup is almost doomed to failure, and for multiple reasons, right? One is it's very hard to bootstrap liquidity, right? To bootstrap users, and so I always tell people when they're pitching me, I say, what is your Halo, right? The video game, like app gonna be? So Arbitrum again had GMX and a couple others games. Optimism's got they were early. They have an easy to integrate SDK. They've got shared liquidity amongst everyone who's building on the Optimism SDK, but they've also got Base, right, and Farcaster. Solana was early. It was 1,000x improvement over the incumbent tech at the time. So they were able to attract liquidity. But if you look at Cosmos, if you look at Polkadot Parachains and several others, like a lot of people didn't have a competitive advantage. They were unable to bootstrap liquidity sets. The validator sets therefore failed, and they're just kind of like dead in the water. And that's why you're seeing it's like if you look at Cosmos, you've got Osmosis, which is really good. You've got DYDX, which migrated after being in an ETH2, then migrated to its own app chain, but it already had a huge user base. And this is kind of my thoughts when we think about the future of the SVM. Like people are giving me pitches and they're saying, "Oh, we're going to launch our app as an app chain." I'm saying to myself, like, you're literally losing all the benefits of being on Solana L1 by trying to be your own app chain from the get-go, unless you somehow have some type of technical or some type of growth-related factor that's going to set you 10x or 100x above like what's in market. You're not going to succeed because not enough people are going to use you. Sure, you might get some mercenary like farmers, right? You're going to get this capital that just rotates in, farms the crap out of you for airdrops, maybe stays for a little bit. You get a 10% conversion rate, 90% churn rate out, and then what? And so that's what I'm always looking for. I'm looking for something with a sustainable competitive advantage. I'm looking for, if you're building a new layer, right? I'm looking for you to tell me how you're going to come to market with that Halo style app that's going to bring all the liquidity and bring all the users, or at least really jumpstart that flywheel.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. The one thing when I joined the Solana ecosystem, I was looking at, I knew I would fit in at like an L1 with my skill set and what I wanted to work on. And I did a lot of research on Polkadot and Cosmos. And I really like the Cosmos ecosystem, and there are great people building in the Polkadot ecosystem as well. But one of the things that really I found really challenging to get past with the Polkadot ecosystem in particular was like the barrier to entry from an economic standpoint. Like you had to do these parachain auctions, and like you had to raise basically a ton of community capital in order to like get a parachain up, was my read of it. And I just felt like that barrier to entry for a developer was way too high. And the cost of running your own network is also really high. And I think if you can remove those barriers to entry, it becomes a lot easier to experiment and find out what that killer app is in the first place, right? Like you got to lower those barriers. And I think we can do that with open source standards and tools on Solana will help all these teams that are trying to actually answer the question you're asking. But it's still pretty hard where it is today to even start.
Yeah, and then to attract, right, let's say there were no barriers to entry because you've got restake security, other things, restake validator sets, whatever, which is a really beautiful idea. But let's say there are no barriers to entry. How do you still stand out enough to convince devs to build that killer app? And you need some sort of technical prowess, or you need just really incredible 1 out of a million kind of growth prowess. So that's kind of my thoughts there.
Yeah, and I think the question about like what applications can really take off is also really difficult to answer because I think Solana started with DeFi um, and with like Serum and some of the other protocols, and that and what actually took off at the very start were NFTs in 2021. Uh, so that's definitely not something that anyone expected, but I think in general, I feel like it's important to have like an open mind, um, but always focus on the product, right? Make sure that it is the most user-friendly, has the best UI UX, um, and that can encourage users to build. And then there's like the branding part with the hacker houses and events to sort of push that to the next level.
All right, I think we probably have time for like one more question. I've asked this every day at the end of the show, but what have we not talked about that we should have discussed or that I should have asked you guys?
Yeah, I can go first. I think what I'm also interested to learn more from you guys and also chat about are some of the interesting sort of consumer-facing um, or I guess product-centric uh, new initiatives. So like Blink, for example, that most recently happened, ZK compression, and there's the business partnerships with PayPal, Stripe, and there's also interesting. I think that's something that people don't talk about as much. And of course, there's meme coins and that whole mania that's taken off, and what's happening in space. I think those are things that's happening on Solana, and it's very unique to Solana as well. So I think overall I'm really bullish on Solana and SVM ecosystem.
What about you, Alex? What should we have asked you that we didn't ask, or what should we have talked about that we didn't get to cover?
I appreciate that. I mean, I would love to discuss at some point, and we don't do it today, but like when you get to your own app chain, what are some use cases that are really good for an app chain, right? Like, I like gaming. Like, if you're gonna have a very big game, right? You want you want to dominate that state. You don't want to share that state with DeFi. You don't want to share that state with other games. You want to make sure that it's all there. So I think that's really cool. I would love to discuss kind of what kind of, in the end game, do we think that we're going to be seeing L2s kind of following the same route as in Ethereum, where at some point you're going to be doing pre-conf and pre-confirmations, which are essentially, first of all, just context for the listeners, pre-confirmations are a new topic that were kind of brought forward by Justin Drake within the last several months. He's an Ethereum researcher, and pre-comps in my mind are basically like a tip to the L1 sequencer to force include your transaction, and you can, because you're like getting this guarantee that your transaction or bundle of transactions will be included, you shorten the confirmation time. So are we going to be seeing that happening, right? Are we going to be seeing the DeFi-specific environment popping up on L2s because maybe they're not as focused on decentralization? We've seen this in the ETH world, right, where you've got multi-sigs guarding billions of dollars of TVL. You had the founder of Movement Labs tweeting the other day asking about, like, does decentralization even matter? Who cares about decentralization? A lot of people in the ETH camp seem to be leaning away from decentralization and, to my mind, censorship resistance. And cryptographics secures, cryptoeconomic security guarantees. And so you're going to see that happening in SVM or in the Solana L2 world. I'm kind of already starting to get pitches that I think are telling me that the answer is going to be yes, but always happy to like have this exploration with founders, always happy to listen, because if there's a subset of users who don't care about it, then I think that there should be builders who build for them. But anyway, so these are some things I'd love to talk about at some point. I think they're quite interesting.
Thanks for that. That's I agree. It is really interesting, and it'll be really interesting to see where it goes. And we've already seen some of that conversation materialize on the Everything SVM series we did this week. We had Jonas from Sonic SVM yesterday on the show, and they've built a gaming, chain, gaming specific network and protocol. And so I think like that's definitely starting to play out in real time. I appreciate you guys coming on the show. We have to wrap up now. We've been going at it for about 45 minutes here, which is great. Interesting conversation. For everybody listening in, we're going to do another recording tomorrow, and the last one, at least for now, will be on Monday. Tomorrow, we have Kenji, who's from Nitro Labs, and Jeff from Turbine 3 coming on, as well as Logan Jastrzemski, who is an investor in the space. You guys will probably know him and his partner, Solana Legend from Frictionless. They recently announced their raise, so it'd be really cool to have him on this show as well, because he spent a ton of time, talking about and working with Solana and the SVM specifically. So excited to have him come on and, similar to Alex, kind of give that perspective from the investor side of things. So yeah, thanks guys for being here. I appreciate your time.
Thank you all. Appreciate you.
Thank you.